Back in 2019, I, 18-year-old female, decided to download Tinder a few months after a rough breakup. I was very inexperienced with dating and pretty shy, so it seemed unlikely that I would meet a potential partner in person. Anyway, after a few matches that led to nothing, I came across the profile of someone that I found very attractive, 21-year-old male. We matched, exchanged Snapchats, and continued to set up a date. Our first date was relatively normal/enjoyable. We saw a movie, and by the end of it, I felt like we hit it off. However, our relationship was extremely short-lived. Not long after I had agreed to be his girlfriend, after about a month of going out, he began to behave very erratically and would sometimes fall completely silent in the middle of a conversation, ignoring me when I tried to ask him what was wrong. He became hot-tempered, slamming doors, and speeding on the road when he was mad. I started to feel really uncomfortable about our relationship. This went on for about a few weeks, until one night. When we were on our way to have dinner downtown, he fell silent mid-conversation. I became extremely anxious as he pulled into a nearby parking garage, wondering what I had done to upset him. As we parked, I decided to ask him what was wrong. He did not answer. When I asked him again, he shouted at me to shut the fuck up. I was completely frozen for a moment, but I had finally got up the courage to tell him we were done. I gathered my belongings from the car and walked over to the nearest coffee shop to call an Uber. It was fairly late at night, so I walked as fast as I could, hoping he wouldn't follow me. When I made it into the shop, I noticed I had several missed calls from him. When I made it home that night, I blocked him on all social media and decided to never contact him again. I'm fairly familiar with the dynamic of toxic relationships, and I knew that if he could talk to me that way, completely unprompted, it was likely he was capable of much more. About a week goes by as I start to settle my emotions a bit. I decided to confide in a friend, who had never met the guy, about what happened, feeling completely embarrassed. A few nights later, I received a text from the same friend. It was a screenshot of an Instagram DM from someone she didn't follow, my now ex. It said something to the effect of, "Hey, I'm sorry we're having to meet like this, but," is ignoring me, and I need to talk to her. My heart sunk. I decided to message all of my friends separately and let them know what happened, just in case. Later that week, I started receiving several DMs from various accounts, all without profile pictures or posts. Eventually, I gave in and responded to one, asserting that the relationship was over and that I didn't want to hear from him again. I blocked the accounts immediately afterwards. As time went on without hearing a word in weeks, I figured I had reached the end of the situation. Until one morning, I walked to my car. I noticed something dangling around the handle of my car door. It was a necklace I gave him. He had only picked me up once from my house before. The thought of him driving to my house, about a half hour from his place, earlier that night freaked me out. I was shaken up for a while. It was by no means an expensive necklace, and I had the exact same one, but I kept it pushing. I thought maybe it was his way of acknowledging that we were done. 2 months later, I was working my job at a small boutique near my house. I was used to answering the phone several times a day, so when the phone rang, I thought nothing of it. But when I picked up, I immediately recognized his voice. He started rambling about wanting a sweatshirt back, but I hung up before he could finish. That was the last time I would ever tell someone I was dating where I worked. I was completely losing it at this point, especially considering he had never called me at work while we were together. I didn't even know how he knew that I was working that day. I told my sister about the situation, and she, being very protective, decided to message him herself. She told him to leave me alone and even offered to give him back the sweatshirt for me. He refused and insisted on meeting up with me in person to get it. When it became abundantly clear that he didn't actually want the sweatshirt back, she threatened him with a PPO, to which he never responded. That was the last time I heard from him. I was just fresh off a major split up when some friends of mine encouraged me to use Tinder. After witnessing my friend use it himself, I decided to give it a go. What could go wrong, I thought. I spent hours on end swiping and swiping. Some matched, some didn't. It was fun, And then I swiped Linda, and we matched. A decision I'd end up regretting. We spoke for a few weeks on and off, and got to know each other. She seemed like a nice enough girl. She was a bit older than me, yet looked a whole lot younger. She wasn't fussed about going out for a meal or a cinema trip or anything traditionally romantic, so we arranged to meet up at a bar instead. At first glance, she was barely recognizable from her profile picture. She looked a lot older and had clearly gained a lot of weight. Already the first red flag was starting to show. That's not the major problem though. We got our drinks and got into some good conversations. We seemed to have a lot in common. Maybe too much. In my instincts, I had the impression that she's perhaps did some research on me somehow and was trying her best to impress me. There came a point of awkward silence. I thought of something to say to kind of break the silence, but she already beat me to it. "Let's talk about sex," she said. I was too stunned to get my head around at how forward and straight to the point she was. She asked me about my sex life and what stuff I'd got up to with my previous partners. We exchanged our stories. To be honest, mine didn't seem half as exciting as her dramatic ones, so I just made stuff up. I never felt comfortable talking about this to someone on a first date. It was at this point she would reveal something to me that made me sick from the pit of my stomach. She told me she liked bondage, and that she liked to torture and abuse people just for fun. One story in particular, she told me that she tricked a man into getting into bed with her, and how shocked he was to lie down on a bed full of thumbtacks. At this point, I was quickly slurping my drink and getting my excuses ready to leave. Then she told me her final story. She told me that only the week before meeting me, she had met a man from Tinder and got him to take her to his own flat. She said she was well prepared and had a bag full of items in her car. Bondage tools. Then, to my horror, she told me she had wrapped him up in a cling film, over and over again, from head to toe until he was almost mummified. And then she just left him there, on his own flat, and abandoned him. She laughed as she impersonated his mumbles and his pleas for help. "He's probably dead by now," she said, chuckling as she sipped her own drink. At this point, I decided to leave. There was no point in staying. I don't even want to question if this was a joke or not. I just got up and left. She attempted to kiss me, but I swerved out of her way. I just got up and left as soon as I could. Safe to say I never met her again, and I hope I never will. I decided to go ahead and make this account, to type this story out, and get sucked into the rabbit hole that is this app. I don't know if I actually avoided something sinister for a fact, but I'd rather play it all safe and say that I did. I'm a 29-year-old female, and while I'm well-traveled and have been around quite a lot, I do occasionally make some pretty rookie mistakes. My fault. And I make no excuses. I try to remain diligent and alert, but I'm very capable of letting my guard down. So after being here in the US for about 2 months, I decided that I was bored sitting around in my unit watching 90 Day Fiancé, so I decided to make the old dating profiles again. I made no specific intentions known about what I was interested in accomplishing, as I don't really know myself. I just wanted someone to hang out with and see where it goes naturally. I ended up matching with this one bloke who had shared interests with me. We chatted a bit over the app, and eventually I felt okay to give him my number. After talking back and forth for a couple of weeks, I agreed to meet up. We met at a pub and have a couple drinks. I'll admit at first I didn't recognize him because he didn't resemble his photos to the extent I was expecting. He didn't look bad by any means, but I could tell that he used older photos and edited them enough to where he seemed more appealing. I swear I'm not trying to sound superficial, because he was cute, just not what I was expecting. But I also think we hit a point in social media culture where it's safe to assume that we won't see the same thing in real life as we do online, and that's okay. We did hit it off. We discussed the usual first date stuff. Then we got into more detail. I told him about back home and work, and how life was different than here in the States. At one point, we were talking and holding hands, and I felt comfortable enough to let him kiss me. Well, he asked me as we were leaving if I wanted to go back to his place for a cup of coffee. I told him I knew what coffee really meant, and that I didn't want to do that on a first date. He assured me it would be 1 cup of coffee and that he would give me a lift home so that I didn't have to call an Uber. I accepted his offer, and we walked to his apartment, which was a few blocks away. As we were going upstairs, he made a few questionable remarks. He mentioned how I wasn't like most girls because I accepted his invitation, and alluded that, you never know, I could be a psychopath. He then motioned with his eyes down to my chest and inquired about my size. I told him again that I was sorry, but the night would not end with him getting lucky. As we got into his unit, he dismissed himself to the toilet and left me sitting on his bed. It was a studio and he didn't have a couch. As I'm sitting there and waiting for him to finish doing whatever he was actually doing, I noticed in the corner by his bed that he had 2 masks. One was a cartoon-looking goat mask, and another was a cat, or maybe a tiger. What was more alarming was that he also had a Bowie knife and a small woodcutter's axe only a short distance away from them. Upon further observation, I also noticed there was a black jumper draped over a dresser. Then, on his bedside table, there were a pair of latex gloves. Okay, I don't feel like being murdered tonight. I got up and calmly left the unit. Then I made haste down the stairs and down the street, where I was able to catch a lift. Now look, I may have just really hurt his feelings because he had no malicious intent, but if that's all that happened, then I'd prefer that over the possible alternative. All of these items alone wouldn't have been that bad, but all of these items within a short walk of each other, I'd rather just not chance it. I do feel bad for leaving a person, but I don't feel bad about leaving what could have potentially been a dangerous situation. That, along with his random personality change, was enough for me to make the call that I made. As of recently, I noticed that he either blocked me from Tinder or deleted the app. My friend told me this horrific story yesterday, and it has to be the scariest thing I've ever heard, so I felt like sharing it to remind everyone to stay safe and cautious. This happened to a friend of our friend not too long ago. So this girl matched with a guy on Tinder and went on a couple of dates with him. On the first 2 dates, they went for coffee on walks outside. She really liked him, thought he was friendly, good looking, etc., and thought they clicked. For the 3rd date, the guy suggested she could come over to his place to have some wine. She agreed because she felt safe and comfortable enough to do so at this point. So the time comes and she goes over to his place, and he pours her a glass of wine. Things seem to go well. They joke around and enjoy a nice talk. After a while, she starts feeling funny. Now luckily, this girl had already been roofied once before, so she immediately recognized the effects once they kicked in. She was extremely clever in this situation and pretended she was feeling fine. She told him as cheerfully and energetically as possible that she was quickly going to use the toilet, as to seem like nothing was off. Once she was in the toilet, she locked the door and immediately called the police. She told them she was drugged, locked in the toilet, and that they needed to come get her out of there. Pretty soon after, she passes out. She awakes by the police but is still very drugged, so kind of slides in and out of consciousness. All she remembers is the police putting a bag over her head as they carry her out of there. She was saved. A few days later, she is asked to come down to the police station to give her declaration of events. After doing this, she asks whether she remembers the police putting a bag over her head correctly, or if it was imagined due to the drugs, or what was up with that. They tell her that they indeed put a bag over her head. They decided it would have been too traumatizing for her to see what he had prepared and set up for her in the living room. The guy ended up in jail, and to this day, she doesn't know what he had in mind for her, but it's clear this was a very messed up, incredibly scary situation that could have ended horribly. Please, always let someone know when you plan on going on a Tinder date. Even if you feel safe, even if it's not your first date, always ask a friend to call and check up on you during and after to let someone know you're safe.